Well, Freemasonry is the oldest fraternity in the world. Historians, particularly Masonic historians, disagree as to when it started. There is a knowledge of a fraternal Freemasonic body existing as far back as the latter 1100s. But what had occurred was that if you go back in history, all through the biblical times, up through the Roman period and so forth, you'll find, in Greek period and everything, you find that civilization grew on stonemasonry. And also that's where really geometry was developed and used for their purposes. And if you're a stonemason in the Middle Ages, you usually started, say, around 15 or 16 for your training as an entered apprentice. And you were referred to as someone the bearers of burden. You were kind of the grunt, but you always had a mentor who was teaching you and preparing you for the next leg of your journey to become a stonemason. And that involved the mathematics, that involved basic engineering. Stonemasons weren't just dealt in stone, they were carpenters because they had to do the framing, they were metal workers, and a combination of other skills in order to build cathedrals, chapels, fortifications, castles, or whatever was required. And Masonic bodies or lodges or guilds it was a time where people were very religious. And going back to even the pagan times, every stonemason body had a god that they dedicated their work to. But as the Romans came into being, they developed what they call collegiums. So as they conquered different countries, they would find the brightest among the people there and would bring them into this collegium to teach them to be stonemasons. Again, you have other skills that had to go with that. And as the empire dissipated and Christianity came into being, there was a group called the Comasine monks who had their monastery on Lake Como in Italy. And they were... Yeah. But they were men who were very learned, and more than just stonemasonry, they were learned in the sciences and other fields of philosophy and so forth. But their main endeavor was to do stonemasonry, and they traveled. They had people traveling throughout Europe teaching the art of stonemasonry.
Can you kind of tell us the time period?
Okay, we're talking probably, again, you're talking now probably 4th century up through the 11th to 12th. By that period, you're starting to see the waning of the demand for stonemasonry and other types of structures, and so wood and other types of things started to take their place as being a less expensive way of doing things. So they embraced or brought into their organization people that they called speculative Masons, which was like having associate members, but it was like networking in order to try to get commissions, whether it's to build an estate or whatever it is they could get. And so, but the speculative Masons started to become greater than the stonemasons or the operative Masons that existed. And about by the, say, 1600s, 1600s, men, particularly of landed gentry or nobility, would like to get together for like banquets and for a good time, and they usually were kind of drinking parties. And the men started to say, is there more for a reason for us to gather? And those that were particularly religious said, well, why don't we try to have some kind of an organization that reflects the values and that come from our religious upbringing that we can apply to our community and can apply to other people in a philosophical, applied way. And so up into the 1600s, this started in the latter 1500s, and it started growing through the 1600s. Nobody knew it existed. They got a reputation of being secret. But in truth, there's probably only 10%, if that's really secret in Masonry. But anyway, so in 1717, the lodge in London decided to make themselves known to the public, and partly to help get more members. And at the same time, there are 5 other lodges in and around London that they decided to form an association that became the first Grand Lodge. There's probably 2 sets of groupings in Masonry. You talk about the moderns and the ancients. York area and Aberdeen, Scotland, and so forth were very big on operative Masonry, even into that period. But they also had their speculative element. And they pre-existed, both philosophically and in terms of their work. They refer to themselves as the ancients. And while the London group that was formed in terms of Grand Lodge about 1717 were the moderns, or they came more recently. So over time in England, with the different bodies of Masonry existing, by 1812 they merged to form the United Grand Lodge of England. Of course, during that time, after 1717, Boston became the center of Freemasonry in the colonies, and Philadelphia right afterward. And to this day, though in a friendly way, they keep telling each other, we were the ones that started the ball rolling. And they had leave by the Grand Lodge of England to charter new lodges around the country. And of course, the United States being a little different and more progressive, they invented some additional bodies, what they call concordant bodies, to go with Freemasonry, that kind of have what they call chivalric nature. And they're outgrowth of the York Rite, which has different levels, eventually coming to what they call the commandery of the Knights Templar. And then there's what they call the Scottish Rite, which I'm more active with. It goes up through, and you have the highest level of Masonry, or Scottish Rite Masonry. It's not something you work for or you take a class in or anything of the degree. It's the 33rd degree. Of course, there's some other recognitions under that, and and those are usually the people that are considered the leaders, the mentors, and so forth of the Scottish Rite. But Scottish Rite now has kind of been evolving, getting more with the 21st century. They've been developing training programs, personal development programs, and things of this nature, and that they're exporting to the Blue Lodges, which are the regular lodges of Masonry, ancient craft Masonry as they call it, and to try to help them improve their method of leadership and management and so forth. The thing about Masonry, because it imparts knowledge through ritual and through elocution, and to be instructive. And of course, the aprons they wear, of course, is representative of the operative Masonries. But in colonial times and before, each office, and we can look at that upstairs, it's more indicative, you would have designs on the apron which reflected that particular degree. And so as each degree was held, one of the officers would come forward and show his apron, and he would explain the symbolism and lessons of the degree in a lecture, using that as sort of like a diagram to present it to the candidate. And I can show you how that works later on.
No cameras back then.
No videotape or anything like that.
So how do you show somebody?
That's right. And instead of taking an easel, put all that up, they just simply printed it on the
Because of the
apron.
symbols and everything, did that have a lot to do with illiteracy? That often people couldn't, what was true with churches too, that people didn't necessarily all read, and so visuals were really, and symbols were important for them to understand.
That's a good question. I think you'll find that that's true to a certain extent, that education for some depending on what they had to do for work and to help to pay for the food they put on the table for their families and everything. They might not have come from a family that could afford them to get particularly a formal education. But actually, when it comes to Masonry, at least going back to the stonemasons themselves, historians have often referred to them as being illiterate. But when you have a training period that starts at 15 and ends by becoming a master mason at 35, and you have to use geometry, and they have what they call trestle board, which in the earlier days was a large table that had beeswax on it. And so the assigned master to the project would literally write up the plans on that trestle board, showing the whole thing, what they were supposed to do to build. They might have on the side in paper some localized projects, like this is how I want the stone to be placed and all this kind of thing. And because of that, over time, instead of just pertaining to the work that they did as stonemasons, and this is how it became more fraternal as it came along, you had as it was the case, they were really literate men. They had to be able to read and communicate and all this kind of thing on paper and orally and so forth. They started becoming curious about origins of things and so forth. And in the symbolism, they started using things like Euclid. They talked about Aristotle. They talked about all these different classic kinds of things that related to the history of civilization, and also things related to religion, how they relate to one another. And that's where the symbolism comes from. In Masonry, instead of building a structure, the idea is that you're building yourself. You're using the core values and principles that Masonry talks about to help build a better person.
Now, is that a word that you're interested in yourself, or a concept? We're talking about being curious, or is it really built into?
Well, yeah. Now that as Freemasonry's fraternity has evolved,
Yeah.
it's become more into that, and it became an area where, in fact, the work of Masonry in the earlier days was really became a place every meeting was more like a symposium.
Okay.
You'd have 3 or 4 speakers talking on a particular subject. It could be anything from philosophical views, history. It could be about current events. I mean, you had men that talked about the philosophy of government. They would bring in philosophers from outside, like John Locke, who said that government should be derived by the consent of the governed. And consequently, other people outside of Masonry started to realize that. And Masonry started to be a little bit concerned to governments, because they were free to talk about these ideas and things in a tiled lodge of Masonry. But again, they were talking more in terms of philosophy. But one of the obligations you take is not to foment a revolution, to support your government. And but yet, in history, there have been a lot of Freemasons who were a part of the founding of America. About a third of those who signed the Declaration of Independence that we know of were Freemasons, and roughly the same ratio for the Constitution. Though some historians believe that there might have been more there, but maybe others were just in the process of going through the previous degrees before they became a Master Mason. David McCullough was being interviewed and he said, well, look, he says, you wrote about Truman, you wrote about Adams, and you wrote about Washington. Of those 3, who do you think was the greatest president of the 3? And he paused a minute, and he came back and says, George Washington. And he says, you're just saying that because he's the first one? Partly. He said, partly. He said, because he established the precedent, the foundation on which a president should operate. he was conscious of the need to follow the Constitution. He was conscious, realizing he's the first, he had to be careful about how he did things, so not to go beyond what the Constitution required him to be. And so he said, but also, Washington, as a young man, was like the rest, all young men, was cocky, and he had big ambitions to be a favorite of the king and to become a very important person. And he says until he joined a certain secret esoteric society that he seemed to go through a change after that and became more modest and more contemplative about how things should be done. David McCullough made that comment, and I'm sitting there watching, I'm trying to keep myself from jumping up and going, yeah! As, you know, but, and you know.
And say it for that would be, what is it? Yeah. Say it again.
What's that?
What is the name of that he was being, you know, kind of...
Freemasonry, but he didn't say it, he kept it.
That's right.
He kept it, he was subtle about it.
That on record, again, it's...
Oh yeah, and, but he did. I mean, I've become over time a bit quite interested in Washington, and it is amazing. He did seem to evolve and that's what McCullough's getting at. He became very, you know, reserved. He didn't make rash decisions. He was collaborative. That's the beauty of Masonry, is the mentoring process. And I joined in 1990 after I'd been through the various chairs of JCs and things, and I was kind of pursued, if you will, though I'm supposed to ask, I'm not supposed to be recruited, but sometimes they throw the rules away a little bit. So back in 2006, I was elected District Deputy Grand Master, and two people were particularly excited about Lawrence Carley, who was the father of Brian Carley, who was also a mentor. He was a past Grand Master.
Wasn't there a Carly Florist or something?
Yeah, I think that's a daughter of Lawrence's, yep. And and Walter. And tail end of the 1800s, the Concordia bodies started getting more prominent. And the lodge, Brattleboro Columbian Lodge, was interested in having a more permanent location that they could call their own and not necessarily have to rent. For a while, they were over on Elliott Street. Now, the area of stores there where like Tailors for Flowers is, they were up on the second or third floor of that building. Okay. And they weren't necessarily going back and forth at that time. So they formed incorporated a special committee group to come up with a new lodge. And so the front part of this is the original house that Dr. O'Connor had. And, but he was thinking of retiring. He didn't have anyone that was taking over the business. He was thinking of moving on to someplace else. And so they decided to buy his house with the idea of raising it. Of course, in those days, in fact, you get on the website and you can ask for Grand Masonic buildings across the United States, and they have row on row of these very fancy buildings.
Can you name some of those prominent Masons around that time period that wanted this and created this? Would there be names we would recognize that were in the community?
Maybe not. I'm not sure. There was a fellow by the name of Tillotson who wrote a history of Vermont Masonry up to a certain point, I think, to latter 1800s, and I borrowed a lot from him writing that paper.
And he lived in Brattleboro?
He lived in Brattleboro.
Okay.
In fact, he was, I think, one of the first masters of Brattleboro Lodge, and he also had belonged to Columbian. But what's interesting is if you look at records of the annual meetings, which tell the review of everything that went on in the state during the course of the year, he is still mentioned up through the 1930s and 40s. So he must have lived to be a fairly old man and lived in 2 centuries and experienced two types of regimes. I always find that romantic because you have someone that lived in you might say the horse and buggy days, and suddenly now is in the age of radio and planes and movies.
And transportation.
And transport, yeah, the whole.
Which is a big thing and a big part of the history of Brattleboro.
Yep.
It is a jackpot of being creative and moving on with transportation because of its location.
Of course, you do have the Estes. You had Jacob Estes.
Well, that's it. That's what I was going to ask you. So we know next door is his church. The
Yep.
Baptist church
Yep.
was the, Estes with
Yep.
the famous windows.
Yep.
Do you know much about the windows?
Not that much, but they did have one that was evidently commissioned. Oh, what's that great jewelry place?
Tiffany.
Tiffany's, yeah. Tiffany, when things, the finances started getting tough, they sold that.
The one in the front. They
Yep.
did have to sell the one thing, but that's how connected they were to create the church next door. So I'm assuming when this was ready to go in 1910, that was thriving next door.
Yep.
The Baptist church
Yep.
next door was the library next door before.
I'm not sure when the Brooks Memorial Library started. I think it must have been because, had to be, yeah. And it's, of course, we won't get into that because that's a whole history, but a lot of us wish they never tore it down. But anyway.
Well, so this is going to be part of the project of what we look for in the 250 year is to really look into
Yep.
the history.
Anyway,
of,
going back to Masonry, we mentioned Estes.
Yeah.
It was also.
So would they have been participating at that time?
I believe so.
That
Yes.
time?
Oh, yeah. That was in their era
Yeah,
of work
I
and
think
everything.
so.
Either Jacob or he and his brothers contributed to helping the continued building of Shaw University, which I think was a school for African Americans down, I forget where it is, one of the Carolinas. And so they were very much involved in that kind of work. And other types of education seemed to be a thing for them. And so we'd like to contribute their money to those kinds of areas. But anyway, that's going off to a little bit.
Yeah, so where did they raise the $55,000?
Why they raised funds? Well, yeah, that was part of the work of
Everybody wants to know that.
the corporate process. To be truthful, I'm not clear on that, but I believe, and it's often done this way, they put the word out to other Masonic organizations, like around New England, Grand Lodges and everything else. And it's amazing to how they support other Masonic organizations in either their charities or their work in building lodges and things like that. And they probably also put out, I think they also had shares. And you had also at that time, because of the business community here, there was a part of Masonry, it was a much larger organization then. They probably took shares into the building, which is like really making a pledge or a donation. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the members did that as well. Mm-hmm. So between a drive and the members themselves, they raised, the $25,000 actually. It ended up something like 220 or 30 people, and I don't think I got to everybody that was a Mason that was in the Civil War. But so at one point I also wrote a paper called The Founding Freemasons of Vermont, and this doesn't hit it all. So that was one of the exhibits at the booth, and these were not only we call it Founding Freemasons because these were people who founded Vermont and were also Freemasons. And of course I put Ethan Allen over there. He was an entered apprentice. He didn't get beyond that. He was kind of a busy fellow, and but we still count him as a Freemason nonetheless. Brother Ira Allen was a Master Mason. And Brother Chittenden, Thomas Chittenden, was also a Master Mason. And he got his degrees up here in Vermont, not in Connecticut where he's from. Now, I'm not sure. I think he and Ira became friends. And they went around to each of the lodges, 5 or 6 lodges that existed then, and got their degrees, because it depends on who was doing what degree at what time. And so they, in those days, even though they didn't have the kind of travel we have today, and cars and highways and interstates and all this kind of thing, they would manage to find their place around Vermont, north or south, east or west, and people didn't seem to mind taken a couple days or so to travel to any one point. You have also Brother Seth Warner. Now, he looks quite old there, but in actuality, he was only, I think, something like 43 or 4 when he died. He died largely from fatigue. His father moved from Connecticut. They had a place down in Reading, Connecticut, and he moved up to Bennington and started an apothecary, which in those days was kind of more like herbal medicine today. And Seth became very knowledgeable about that. But also he was interested in being in the woods and knowing his way around. He became quite a woodsman, and he later joined the militia and became a very capable commander. And of course was very capable in saving the day at the Battle of Bennington. I forgot the area across the border in New York, but he came kind of almost the last minute when it looked like things weren't going to be too good for the Green Mountain Boys and the soldiers from New Hampshire and some from Massachusetts and so forth that came over, and he flanked the British and won the Battle of Bennington. Roger Enos was Ira's father-in-law. Benjamin Waite, Nathaniel Gove, Israel Smith, Nathaniel Chipman. Chipman's very prominent, and including, I think, his brother later became Grand Master, Brother Isaac Tickner. And so, as I said, I tried to write a book. I was thinking I'm trying to get it published to give the proceeds to the Grand Lodge for their charities, but not too many people were interested in it. I went to Masonic publishing houses, and they said it was more of a reference piece, so I learned something. But I'm thinking of maybe expanding this into a book with a more narrative instead of having it look like a reference piece. And because it might be, a lot of people know these names of these people as far as Vermont history is concerned, but they don't know them in relation to being Freemasons. So it could be kind of an interesting thing to do. But anyway, I won't give you a lecture on this. This is based on an explanatory lecture on the Masonic apron. And this, of course, represents the motto of our jurisdiction. Each state, each country is a Masonic jurisdiction. Brotherly love, relief, and truth. And of course, the all-seeing eye. And then you have the 4 cardinal virtues, which you're talking about temperance, fortitude, prudence, and justice. Some things we probably should have more of today. Masonic apron. This talks about the Masonic apron more in terms of what its symbolism is. And each of the parts of this in a lecture could be explained a wide range of what the philosophy and key points of Masonry are. In one of the lectures, we talk about the several liberal arts and sciences: grammar, rhetoric, logic, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy, which in terms of the 19th century or even 18th century, those are how they looked at called the liberal arts. And they probably would be called something a little bit different today. So moving along this way, well, let me give you a quick look in here. This is our downstairs lodge room. It used to be our billiard room. And I can kind of explain to you quickly about the positions of the members of the lodge. Now, no matter how the room is set up, wherever the master of the lodge, which is here, is referred to as the Masonic East. And they have to wear a hat. It could be a top hat like that, like this one right here, or it could be one which has the square on it. And he cannot preside over a meeting unless he's wearing that hat. It's symbolic of his responsibilities and authority in the lodge. This is usually a visitor's chair. This is where the chaplain often sits. The secretary sits there. You have over here the treasurer's position. Right there would be the marshal. Then moving down to what would be the junior warden's position, you have what they call the 2 stewards. Now, the stewards worked with the junior ward because he supervises the internal activities of the lodge, including things for refreshment, banquets, and dinners. And when there's someone to be greeted, they get up with their staffs and provide a gate for the person to come to be recognized. Let's see. Then behind you, over here's the junior deacon, and he works with the tiler outside the lodge to see the lodge is duly tiled. And that's the senior warden. And the senior warden works very closely with the master. It's sort of like what I call the Star Trek form of leadership. The senior warden is kind of like Riker, first officer, and so the master is like the one said, make it so, and it kind of goes down from there in terms of delegation. The senior warden makes sure things are carried out and done as they're supposed to, if they follow good leadership anyway. So that gives you kind of a quick thought and summary of that. And of course, we cannot have a meeting unless we have the Bible open in the lodge. Also, we have our flag ceremonies as well. Going this way over to our boardroom, library, whatever you want to call it. Oh, this fellow was one of those that Betty was trying to refer to. William Vinton. He was one of the instigators of getting this lodge building put together here on Main Street. This is the drawing of the building I was talking about that was $55,000. And it would definitely be quite a building, to say the least. It'd be almost a memorial-looking kind of building, but it was probably very smart of them not to want to go that far, because they probably would have had, as they got further into the 20th century, it might have become more of a challenge to keep it going sooner. This is sort of a library. Some of the brothers have contributed their own Masonic books that they've have read and so forth, and some of them you pick up from other places. They're a little bit worn, that second, third hand books. It's a picture of Kittredge Haskins, who came from Wilmington. He was a veteran of the Civil War, and particularly the Battle of Gettysburg. And he came over here to be a district judge, and he was a member of both Columbian and Brattleboro Lodge, and later became, in 1895, Grand Master of Vermont. Let's see. Those behind you in that bookcase, those are what you call proceedings that go back to probably the very beginning of Vermont Freemasonry. And you can go through them. It's usually proceedings which is a record of what goes on during an annual communication or a Grand Lodge meeting. But it really is also a summary of activities and programs and things that went on during the course of the year throughout the state. Now, one proceeding I liked very much came out in 1945, where they had, which went on for pages, it was an honor roll of Brother Masons who had served during World War II, and some of the things they stood out for doing when they were soldiers. And you have to, when you read it, you get chills, because it shows how truly committed these men were, and what they did for the country. But what was interesting is that initially, at the beginning of the war, the Grand Lodge of England kept contacting our Grand Secretary and saying, well, we have a person from Vermont over here that would like to be a Mason, and we need a copy of your ritual, and we need a warrant allowing us to perform the degrees. Well, after about a year or so of that, the Grand Master tells the Grand Secretary, give them a blanket warrant and tell them to use their own blessed degrees. We'll correct them when they come back. And so anyway, it was kind of interesting that a lot of American men who were either just starting out in their Masonic career or were over there and got interested in Freemasonry, the British were very hospitable and desirous of helping them join the order. And so anyway, you want to go take a quick look upstairs, particularly see the big room? And the main lodge room, it's still kind of it's too bad that we're thinking on selling, because this is quite nice, probably one of the better lodge rooms in the state of Vermont. And because it is large and we have the benefit of have this space, a lot of smaller communities don't have as big a building. So you might find their large room might be a third the size of this, and it would be maybe, this kind of size, which would still be big enough to hold quite a goodly number of individuals. Give you a little light here. We also have some flags that some of our brothers have acquired for the different bodies that exist here. This is, of course, where the secretary sits, and worship master. And that's a left handover, a leave behind from the star. Unfortunately, they get enough members out of recent years that the Grand Chapter didn't feel comfortable in having us maintain our chapter. It was the rules. And so it's kind of too bad that they become, with the membership falling off, that they have to enforce those rules. I think they need to look at perhaps being more flexible. Unfortunately, Eastern Star women cannot be members unless they have a relative, a father, a grandfather, or somebody that's a Mason or been a Mason. And I think they need to loosen it up so you can get more women involved. And certainly that's an opportunity, because if they're related to a brother, a husband, an uncle, or whatever, who might find themselves interested in becoming Masons, that would be a great way for them to consider membership. I'll take you in this room for a little bit. A variety of different meetings. It's been used as a Golden Rule Lodge in Putney years ago had run out of the ability to maintain the building they had there, but they didn't want to give up. So Brattleboro had this space, and they allowed them to come down in their monthly meetings to meet here. Members who, in the 19th century, were fairly prominent. And I guess when I first came in 1990, we used to fill the whole room to the sides, and sometimes we'd have to get some folding chairs to fill the membership. And by around 2005 or 6, we started seeing it falling off. So it's been gradually falling off from there. But we need young blood who appreciate history, and also the parallel of Masonry with the development of the country, who are looking for to be in touch with certain values and structure without necessarily being hard-rocked about it, learning to be flexible, be understanding, be empathetic. This is the age where people keep calling for other people to be more kind. And when we talk about brotherly love, we talk about all the virtues of love, being people who care, who want to help other people. To lift people challenge us. Oh, you talk about God and all this kind of thing, but you don't. But you go against the sacraments. We're not a religion. We are a philosophical society that looks to become better people, reflecting on the lessons that can be drawn from, well, any of the primary religions, and not just one in particular. And that's why our big requirements to joining are to have a faith in God and to be of good repute. And but we're not going to interrogate that person and say, well, what God and how you do it and all this kind of thing. That's their business. But most of the guys that say that, you'll find out, because usually in their deportment and ways of looking at things is very much inconsistent with the kind of values of brotherliness. And brotherliness doesn't mean you have to be related as a brother or anything like that. It means caring for a person well enough and helping them and supporting them in a way that will lift them out of whatever situation they might be going through at a time. And that's so important today. And we've got to think more forward than backward. Earlier, badges and aprons and collars that were men would wear in the lodge meetings.
I'm so curious, what made, I mean, that is a major thing to look at when you come in here, and something is missing in action there. What was hanging?
Oh, you
there
mean
at some
you mean
point?
that? No.
Yeah.
Oh, that's just, again, temporary thing. They put the styrofoam walls up,
Oh.
and again, to try to keep the heat from going up.
Oh, okay, these were all preventive measures.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, this will give you a good example. This is an apron that would be used for instruction, and one of the wardens would be explaining each of those insignias. By seeing what is in there, that's probably for the Master Mason's degree. And now, if you ever go to Sturbridge Village,
Yep.
you will find that there's the print shops. The print shop there used to make a guy with his wife to cut out the material according to specification. She would embroider, put the border on, but beforehand they go to the print shop and they would have a plate that would print those symbols on there. So a lot of print shops around the country would help men with their aprons.
Wow, the print job on that is beautiful. So it looks like somebody more recent carved that into wood, but it's actually a beautiful saying.
Oh, yeah.
You want to read it?
Oh yeah, the philosophy of Freemasonry, properly applied, is a power that works as slowly, as quietly, and as irresistibly as a grain of seed sprouting in the earth. Most worshipful Dwight L. Smith.
Beautiful. I love
Yeah,
that.
that is a good.
Oh, that is just beautiful. Yeah. I love the angle of this. So what originally was this room, what was its
Well, actually, as
most useful purpose?
as we know, one was where the boardroom is, was the card room, the billiard room in there. And again, this was actually, like it is now, a place for guys to come and relax. Sometimes they might play cards in here too, or checkers, or whatever. And it was in the early days, before, even when I was a boy, I would be downtown with my mother, and I look over, I see men on the porch and everything, and I say, "Oh, Mommy, what's that over there?" She said, "Oh, that's the Masonic Lodge." But it'd be almost like an English club. Particularly older men, they would come in and maybe meet with somebody. They would probably read a paper. They would, do different things in between to relax. And so areas like this, or playing cards or billiards or something, would be a diversion for them. And they would have had a key. So then when they become Master Masons, then they would come down and they would make sure it would be locked as they left and secure. And yes, one of the guys I forgot to mention on the wall in the boardroom is Vinton. And Vinton was a very strong individual for getting things going here.
Was that a mercantile person?
Excuse me?
Vinton?
Yeah.
Wasn't that a mercantile business?
I'm not really sure what the thing.
Was that a floor or floors? I've seen it. It's
Yeah.
quite, yeah.
Latter 1800s.
Isn't this aren't these like?
Oh yeah, that's more of the commandery. They would Beauchamp command.
Fire brigade or something?
No, that's the York Rite commandery of Templars.
Okay.
And again, they borrowed. Again, the York Rite and the Scottish Rite are chivalric in nature. And like for example, on this pin, this is the Knight of the Rose Croix, and it's also it has some relation to Rosicrucians, and also has some relation to the Templars. And it's quite a beautiful degree, to say the least. And of course, this is my pen for MSA pen, and this is my 33rd degree pen.
Wonderful.
And
Wonderful.
but in the Scottish Rite, as you go up different levels, part of it is you get dubbed a knight of that particular order. And again, it's a Masonic order, not necessarily one recognized by a king of England or something like that. It's more for the, but each one has its own lessons. And of course,
So I'm looking at this break front here, and I see 2 photos there. I see trophies. I see the little glasses that I recognize.
Oh, yes.
When I came and celebrated.
You
That's
probably-
what we got. We got to take one home.
yeah, ladies at the table probably, yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, Vermont started the ladies at the table. They only had the regular table lodge. And it's based on, really, though the history behind it is talked about how it was established in England and all that. And it might have predated English, but if you look at any history, particularly of the Scottish Black Watch, military, anything like that, they would have these officers' tables, and which toasts and toasts everything.
I'm so impressed with the toasting.
Oh yeah, and it's. I mean, if you were to see a picture or demonstration of that, you'd think it was the military lodge doing that,
Absolutely.
and it's based on the tradition.
And the picture right there, it is a photograph of the building.
Yep.
What year would that have been?
Oh boy. Black and white. I
The
wouldn't.
fact that it got to be in a frame must mean something.
Yeah. Well, I can't be certain. I would say because it looks so recent, and
Yeah.
I would say probably, again, it probably would be circuit 20s, 30s, somewhere in there, by just looking at it.
And the other one is what?
Square and compass here?
Yeah.
Yeah, square and compass, and that, of course, is based on the operative Mason's insignias because, well, again, it goes to geometry and engineering because you have to have these tools to map out your work. And so each one of these, again, because that's part of the, you might say, secrets, I can't explain to you what it's said about it, but it's nothing bad, but these are demonstrative of how they apply symbolically to one's to virtue and character and all this kind of thing. And so it's been adopted by the fraternal Freemasons to become symbolic of that. And
Well, for those who would be interested in researching that.
yeah.
Are there any final words that you'd like to speak to about this building, about Freemasonry, any of your experiences or anything?
Well, knowing that Betty wanted to have this done as a way of educating the public, I think it's a great idea. It's for us who are members here, it's kind of a sad thought or an idea that we may have to sell it because of our inability to really keep it up. Membership has fallen off. The source of money is such that we can't put the investment it needs. And hopefully some people will come along that can put it to better use without taking it down, because somehow we'd like to see if a memory of what was here before might continue. Our plan is, if we should sell it, to use the money to invest and pay for or lease some space elsewhere in town. And that should give us enough money to work with to do more with charity. And a lot of lodges around the country in Vermont has found that trying to keep their buildings going has detracted from their ability to serve more in the community and to reflect the symbols or the principles of Masonry through their work in the community. And it's too bad, but
And Steve,
it's
what
evolution.
makes this Masonic temple so very special
Well, again, because when you look at,
versus so many?
yeah, when you go back to Columbia Lodge started in 1811, you got to realize then that you're only talking roughly what, 24 years or something like that when the Constitution was written. And And Vermont, being the 18th Grand Lodge to be formed in the world, which is a distinction in itself, out of hundreds of Grand Lodges, they were formed in 1792. I mean, the people who were active in this lodge, going back to, say, 1811, 1812, were among those that were the leaders of the community, leaders in business, leaders in the community, leaders in their churches, leaders in all aspects of the community. And for so many years, probably a couple of hundred years anyway or more, people like them made Brattleboro so vital. And now we're living in a period where the economy is kind of iffy, and where perhaps leadership is more self-centered than they think investment in America is a sin. And that's the purpose of government, is like it says in the preamble of the Constitution, to provide. It has a whole bunch of things, but I think it sums it up by saying to promote the general welfare. And Masonry and churches and things like that once upon a time contributed to the general welfare of their communities. And still, and a lot of other places, they do that now.
And it is one of four, did you tell me, that is not on the tax roll?
Yeah, in 2010, they worked with their representatives, and then it's just a little paragraph, but they got an enabling act that exempted them. There are 3 other lodges that have that. That at one time, I guess, made it possible for them to spend a little more money on the community and other things.
Mm-hmm.
And we have...
I think that was the point.
Yeah, that was the point. Mm-hmm. And Social Lodge in Wilmington, there's a local tax. They're not exempt, but they've worked out a program whereby their taxes are not as high as it would be, because they do things like a food shelf and a few other things in the community that helps people. And of course the town is more than happy to do that because of what they were doing. And it'd be nice that we could do something like that and do. But again, ego, having fancy buildings versus doing masonry, sometimes comes back to haunt us, because it's sometimes better to let ego go to the side and concentrate on the value you're trying to provide. And so Steve Farrington, worship past master, also a member of Scottish Rite, and 33rd degree, which is involved with Supreme Council, and then grand offices, grand historian, grand junior deacon, several different number of committees and things, and been pretty active for 35 years.